We need to talk. My wife Chloe shouted as she stormed into the living room, her voice slicing through the air. We need to talk right now. I looked up at her, managing a faint smile. Honestly, I'd been bracing myself for something like this. I kind of deserved it, maybe. Well, got anything to say for yourself, Colin? She practically shrieked when I didn't respond. Cat got your tongue? No, sweetheart, I replied, doing my best to keep calm. What's going on? Oh, you know exactly what's going on. You cheating a hole. Chloe shot back, her eyes blazing. I just got off the phone with Linda. Well, there it was. Hearing Linda and cheating in the same breath left little to the imagination. Linda was one of her best friends, and like my wife, she was stunning. But with legs that went on forever and a figure that was maybe even a little more tempting. I'd admired her for years, though I'd never imagined actually crossing that line. Until recently. Oh, that was all I managed to say, though it felt ridiculously inadequate given the situation. So you don't deny that you slept with her, then? Chloe demanded, her voice icy and sharp. Would you believe me if I did? I ventured, without much hope. Of course I wouldn't believe it, you idiot, she growled back. So, no point in me denying it, I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. What did she tell you? Everything. She told me everything. Everything? I repeated with a strained smile. Did she mention how many times she screamed my name? How she reacted when I— Shut up, Colin, she screeched, her face flushing. It's bad enough already, and you're going to pay for this? I'm guessing I'm not going to like that, am I? Damn right you won't, she continued, her voice trembling with anger. If you think you can mess around on me, then I can do the same. What? I exclaimed, though I couldn't pretend her reaction was unexpected. You don't mean. That's exactly what I mean. You cheating jerk, she cut in. You slept with another woman. So I'm going to sleep with another man to get back at you. Maybe more than once. Either you accept it, or I'm talking to a divorce lawyer first thing in the morning. I guess you're not leaving me much choice, sweetheart, I said, acknowledging the corner she had me in. Damn right I'm not, Chloe replied, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. All right then, Chloe, I muttered just loud enough for her to hear. I admit it. You've got me. I'll go with the divorce option. Well, I'm glad you can see, she started to say, only to stop as my words sank in. What? What did you just say? Divorce, I repeated, more firmly. I'll go for the divorce option. But you can't, she replied, her tone suddenly uncertain. I can, I said, holding her gaze. But you can't, Colin, Chloe insisted, her voice wavering. I still love you. I don't want that. I still kind of love you too, sweetheart, I said with a hint of sadness. But you gave me a choice, and that's what I've chosen. But you can't, Colin, she repeated, her voice breaking as she fought back tears. I love our life together. I don't want a divorce. I just wanted a little revenge for what you did. And you still can, Chloe, I replied with a wry smile. If we're heading for divorce anyway, why not go ahead and sleep with Tom tonight, like you were planning? What? Tom? How did you? Chloe stammered, shocked and utterly bewildered. Yes, Tom from work, I said, pressing forward. That's who you were planning to get back at me with, wasn't it? Well, she replied hesitantly, her voice shaky, I guess. He might have been the one I had in mind. I certainly hope so, Chloe, I said, wagging my finger at her. I really hope he's the only one you've been seeing behind my back for the past couple of months. A couple of months? Chloe choked, tears springing to her eyes. How could you know? How could I know? I cut in, giving her a look. You started wearing shorter skirts to work, coming home later and later. You went from wanting sex 3 or 4 times a week to barely once in a while. You come home with your shirt barely buttoned, no bra in sight, and I'm supposed to believe you're just having an extra long day at work. Oh, Colin, honey, she began to cry in earnest. It's not what it looks like. We haven't even slept together. I love you. Chloe, I said, keeping my voice steady. I need you to know I put a recorder on the phone. I've listened to your calls with him, so yes, I know you haven't gone all the way. I paused, watching her face fall further, the tears brimming as she realized the full extent of what I'd discovered. And one of the conversations I heard was with Linda, on Tuesday, I continued, watching her wince as I spoke. Smart move, convincing her to seduce me so you'd have an excuse to go after Tom. But here's the thing, Chloe. I saw it coming, but you went through with it, Colin, Chloe said, her voice trembling. Damn right I did. I chuckled. I've always had a thing for Linda, and let me tell you, she didn't disappoint. Who knows? Maybe I'll even have another round with her once all this is over. But doesn't that make us even? She pleaded, her tone edging toward panic. Can't we just drop the talk of divorce? Maybe, I said, stroking my chin as if considering it. But here's the deal. Are you willing to call Tom's wife right now and tell her exactly what you two have been up to? Oh God, Colin. Please don't make me do that, she begged, her face going pale. This time, it's your choice, Chloe, I said, savoring the moment. After a pause, she sighed. All right, I'll do it. And then tell your company, I added. Your boss won't last long once they know he's been having an affair with an employee. You might get fired too, but that's just the price, isn't it? Fine, she whispered, clearly horrified but resigned. She knew the fallout would shatter Tom's life just as much as her own. And about Linda, I said, leaning in, think you could talk her into seducing me again? I don't think she'll agree, Colin, she said, trying to avoid my gaze. Oh, I'm pretty sure she'll agree if you ask her nicely, I said confidently, my grin widening at the memory of that afternoon with Linda. My smile only grew when I saw Chloe nod in reluctant agreement. And I think a threesome would be in order, I added, pushing the boundaries a bit further. And to be clear, I mean with Linda, not Tom. All right, Colin, she replied, desperation clear in her voice. I'll do anything. Anything you want. Just, please don't end our marriage. We'll see. Once you've followed through with everything I've asked, I replied, giving her a hard look. She looked at me, her face etched with worry. What are the chances? She asked softly. I'd say, maybe 50-50, I said with a shrug, leaving her with a glimmer of hope. Colin leaned back, a cold smile spreading across his face as he watched Chloe's hopeful expression, the desperation in her eyes. He let the silence linger, watching her squirm, before finally speaking up. You know, Chloe, he began, his voice dropping its earlier playful tone. I was just kidding about that 50-50 nonsense. I already filed for divorce. Chloe's face drained of color. What do you mean? I mean it's done, he said, his voice hardening. You'll be served the papers soon enough. And honestly, all that talk about doing anything I wanted, it was just me letting you see how pathetic this whole thing has become. But, Colin, she stammered, panic flooding her face, I said I'd do whatever it takes. I'm willing to make it right. I'll call Tom's wife. I'll quit my job. I'll... Save it, Chloe, he interrupted. You already showed me who you are. This marriage is over. You've got tonight to pack your things and leave. She stood frozen, staring at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. So, go ahead, start packing, he said coldly, glancing at his watch. I expect you out by morning. Colin looked at Chloe, his face hardening as he spoke. You know, Chloe, the truth is that even if you haven't actually slept with him yet, the thought was already there in your mind. And let's be real, it's only a matter of time before it comes back. She opened her mouth to protest, but he held up his hand, silencing her. I can't be your guard, he continued, his voice sharp. I can't spend my life trying to keep stupid ideas out of your head, constantly on the lookout, wondering when you're going to cross the line for real. That's no way to live. But, Colin, I swear, I can change, she said, desperation filling her voice. He shook his head. I've made up my mind. Better to end this now than be on edge for the rest of my life, wondering if or when you'll do this again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to find the words, but Colin wasn't swayed. I'm done, Chloe. I've already filed for divorce. You'll be served the papers soon, so I suggest you start packing your things. He watched her face crumble, but his resolve didn't waver. I want you out by morning. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices. When Chloe was served with divorce papers, her initial shock quickly turned into a desperate fight to salvage the marriage. She pleaded with Colin, promising to change, to do whatever it took to regain his trust. She reached out to family and friends, seeking their support and convincing him to give her a second chance. Chloe even pushed hard for marriage counseling, hoping that a professional could help them work through the betrayal and bring them back to the place they once were. Colin, however, was unmoved. For him, the damage was irreparable. He felt that he could never truly trust her again, and that the thought of staying in the marriage would leave him constantly questioning her actions and motives. Her promises, apologies, and even her tearful pleas left him cold. He had made his decision, and his mind wasn't going to change. Over the next 3 years, the divorce process dragged on, complicated by Chloe's refusal to accept that it was truly over. She contested nearly every detail, hoping that by prolonging the process, Colin might reconsider. She tried to remind him of their shared history, the good times they'd had, and even appealed to his emotions, at one point writing him a long letter outlining everything she loved about him. But Colin's resolve never wavered. Chloe tried counseling on her own, working through her feelings and trying to address the issues that had led her to the brink. She hoped that by becoming a better version of herself, she could win Colin back. In the meantime, Colin maintained his distance, choosing to live his life independently, away from her influence. Finally, after over 3 years of emotional battles, legal standoffs, and futile attempts at reconciliation, the divorce was finalized. Colin walked away, feeling a sense of closure, while Chloe was left to rebuild her life without him. The long fight had worn them both down, but for Colin, it was a necessary step to regain his sense of peace and move forward without looking back. Now let's check the second story. Oh Jesus, Alex. None of us saw that coming. I looked up at Bill, who I'd worked alongside for the past 10 years, desperately fighting back tears. It changes nothing, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it quivered. It changes absolutely nothing. You sure about that, Alex? He asked, a hint of concern in his voice. I'm sure, I replied, glancing over to the other side of the club where Rebecca, my wife of 9 years, was sitting. I'd always considered myself incredibly lucky to be married to a woman like Rebecca, beautiful, with long blonde hair, a toned body, and curves that never failed to take my breath away. I'd fallen for her hard and fast when we first met, and within 6 months, we were married. Over the years, my love for her only deepened, and I was confident she felt the same way about me. That was, until now. What I'd just witnessed had thrown all that into question. With Bill trailing behind me, I walked over to where Rebecca was sitting, laughing and playfully squirming on some guy's lap as he touched her freely, enjoying every moment of it. That son of a... that betrayal. I started to move toward them, but Bill grabbed my arm, stopping me with a warning that I needed to think twice about my next move, especially considering the 7 huge men sitting at their table. He was right. The 7 men in question were the White Twins and their notorious crew, the most feared and ruthless criminals in South London. They were not the kind of people anyone with any sense would want to provoke. Maybe you should step back, Bill advised, his voice low. This isn't even close to over. As he spoke, 3 more young women approached the group, and the guy who had his hands all over my wife, Rebecca, slapped her sharply on the backside and passed her off to another one of the gangsters. The 3 new women spread out among the rest of the men, and within moments, all 4 women were being kissed and groped by the 7 of them. I felt an icy hand clutch my chest as I watched one of them slip his hand under Rebecca's top. Shit. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. She was supposed to be at her sister's tonight. I croaked, my voice breaking. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Out of all the places we could have picked, it had to be this damn club. People at other tables began to turn and look as 2 of the thugs started undoing one of the girls' dresses. Before long, a small crowd had gathered, watching the unfolding scene. It was then that I recognized the woman, now in nothing but a bra and panties, as Nancy, Rebecca's sister. So, this was the life they'd been leading for the past year or so, was it? Twice a week, no less. Ever since her sister's husband had divorced her after catching her in bed with 2 other men. Why hadn't I seen the signs? Why hadn't I suspected anything? Why had I been so naive, giving her so much freedom? I could barely process what I was seeing when Rebecca was lifted up onto the table, encouraged loudly to dance. The man I recognized as Tim White slid his hand under her short skirt, stroking her bare thighs. And did she stop him? Of course not. Rebecca just kept dancing, a sensual smile on her lips as she leaned toward Tim, moving across the table to invite him to touch her more. I was on the edge of losing it. The urge to throw up was overwhelming, but I fought it back, doing my best to keep my stomach in check. Bill, noticing I was about to collapse, grabbed me to steady me. You had no idea, Alex? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. None at all, I whispered, the truth sinking in like a stone in my gut. A couple of onlookers tried to join in, but they were quickly pushed back and punched in the face. One man, foolish enough to fight back, was dragged off to the back, likely in for a beating. By then, Rebecca and another girl, a slim redhead, had been lifted onto the table together. They started dancing provocatively, laughing and enjoying themselves. Soon, they had undone each other's dresses and were dancing topless, flaunting their bodies to the small crowd, who cheered them on. Stop, Rebecca. I muttered under my breath. For God's sake, stop what you're doing. Tim grabbed Rebecca's leg and pulled her toward him, sliding his hand up under her dress. To my shock, Rebecca showed no resistance, laughing as she stepped out of her clothes and kicked them aside. The redhead's dress soon slid down, revealing that she wasn't wearing any underwear. A loud cheer went up from the crowd, and the two girls giggled at the attention. Not wanting to be outdone, Rebecca followed suit, sliding her own dress down until she was just as exposed as her friend. The two of them continued their performance, now fully nude except for their high heels. It was unbearable to watch, and I had to fight the urge to leave, to escape it all. Anything would have been better than staying. Seeing any woman endure such humiliation was difficult enough, but discovering that it was my wife, it was beyond words. Look, Alex, my friend whispered, discreetly pointing toward the far end of the table. They're giving that girl something. I followed his gaze and watched in disgust as a young woman, clearly in a vulnerable state, was being fed something by one of the men. It was obvious that they were feeding her some kind of substance, likely fueling a dangerous habit that this group had lured her into. The realization hit me harder than anything, that my wife might have become as caught up in this as the others. It was a crushing thought. What could I do? What did I want to do? What would any man in my position do? Flashes from cameras brought me back to reality. With a heavy sigh, I knew it was time to act. I couldn't just stand there and watch this any longer. Back me up, Bill, I said, turning to my friend. It's time to put an end to this. We made our way toward the front. I'm a big guy, and Bill's even bigger, so we had no trouble clearing the path through the onlookers. Eventually, we stood right next to the table, close enough to reach the girls and the men surrounding them. One of the thugs, noticing us, growled, "Keep your distance, a-hole. You can watch, but don't touch. If you do, I'll break your neck." I ignored him and called out to my wife. "Rebecca," I shouted, my voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing?" At that moment, Rebecca, along with at least one other girl, was kneeling, and my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. So, I acted. When her back turned to me, I steeled myself and gave her a hard slap on the backside. She screamed in surprise. She screamed, but not as loudly as the man who had been with her. I wasn't sure what he felt, but I imagined he wouldn't be in a rush to experience it again anytime soon. She spun around, ready to yell at me. "You idiot, what are you?" But then she stopped, as if realizing who had slapped her. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, confusion, and shame all mixed together in those brief seconds. Then, chaos erupted. "I warned you, a hole!" The man in front of me shouted, launching himself toward me. But he never got the chance to land the punch. I hadn't mentioned my friend Bill, though. Bill stepped in, catching the guy's punch and quickly neutralizing the threat with one of his own. The crowd, sensing things escalating, quickly scattered, but a few remained, closing in on us. "All right, boss," a voice said from my left. "Let's take them." Tim and his brothers were furious, pushing the women aside in their rush to confront us. I barely had time to pull out my badge, but I managed to get a few words in. "Tim White," I shouted. "You're under arrest for prostitution, drug trafficking, and—" Before I could finish, he lunged at me, but it didn't help. The plainclothes officers who had been in the crowd with us quickly restrained him. By the time the uniformed police arrived a minute later, the fight had already been subdued, and they quickly handled the rest of the situation. Bill and I stood back, watching as the group of disgruntled people in front of us began to disperse. "Detective Inspector," the uniformed sergeant asked, his tone cautious. "What should we do with the women?" "Take them all in," I said firmly without hesitation. "Book them all." "What for?" he asked, now aware that one of them was my wife. "Prostitution, lewd conduct, anything you can charge them with," I growled. "Throw the book at them." Bill and I stepped back as a line of handcuffed gangsters was escorted to the waiting police vans, with the women trailing behind, looking defeated. As my sister's wife passed by, she spat in my direction. It wasn't a good shot, but then, we'd never really gotten along anyway. "Alex, please, Alex," my wife begged as she was led by. "Please don't let them take me away. None of this is what it looks like." I glanced at her and smiled coldly. She'd somehow been shoved back into a dress that didn't fit her well, revealing more than it should. Her figure was on display in a way that reflected everything I'd come to understand about her. "What was it tonight, honey?" I snarled. "A Tupperware party at your sister's?" "No, Alex," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Just let them let me go, and I'll explain everything. Tell it to the judge," I responded coldly. Then, turning on my heel, I walked out of the club, Bill following closely behind, and headed back to my empty house. Another dirty job completed. Alex had always been a man driven by justice. As a detective, he was relentless in his pursuit of criminals, especially those like Tim White, a notorious drug dealer whose operation had been running in South London for years. The pressure was mounting on Tim, as Alex's investigation had begun to get dangerously close to uncovering his network. But Tim, ever resourceful, had anticipated the danger and decided to take a more personal route to protect his business. Knowing that Alex had a soft spot for his wife, Rebecca, Tim devised a plan that would cripple Alex's ability to continue his investigation by exploiting the one weakness that could destroy his resolve. Rebecca, a woman who had always been independent and somewhat careless in her choices, became an easy target. It started with Julie, Rebecca's sister. Julie had already been entangled in Tim's world, a consequence of her failed marriage and an escape from her own misery. Julie had become a willing participant in Tim's operations, and it was she who first introduced Rebecca to the dangerous allure of the club where Tim's gang frequented. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A girls' night out, a few drinks, a bit of fun. But once Rebecca was inside that world, it was hard to step back out. Tim knew exactly what he was doing. He lured Rebecca into the club, where she'd find herself surrounded by men whose intimidation was masked by a false sense of luxury and excitement. At first, the drugs were subtle. A pill slipped into a drink, a line of powder passed casually between friends. But it was enough to hook Rebecca, to get her dependent, to take away her willpower and make her complicit in the chaos that was unfolding. Tim's plan was simple but effective. By getting Rebecca addicted to the drugs his gang distributed, he could ensure that she would be too distracted, too consumed by her own needs, to even consider the consequences of her actions. The more dependent she became, the more likely she would be to keep Alex in the dark about what was really happening. And with her own life spiraling, Alex's investigation would be the furthest thing from her mind. As the drugs took hold of her, Rebecca became more and more a part of the world she was supposed to be avoiding. Her behavior grew erratic, her judgment clouded by the substances she was regularly consuming. The more she gave in, the less she cared about her marriage, or the husband who was on the verge of taking down the very men who were controlling her life. Alex, oblivious to the manipulation at first, began to notice the subtle changes in his wife. She became more distant, more unpredictable. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her behavior felt off. And when he started to connect the dots between the people she was hanging out with and Tim White's gang, he grew more suspicious, but his focus was diverted by her erratic behavior. The night at the club was the final straw. It was no coincidence that Rebecca was in the same place where Tim's gang operated freely. It wasn't just about getting Rebecca to give in to the lifestyle. It was about humbling Alex, making him powerless. Tim's men had arranged for Rebecca to be humiliated, to be degraded in front of Alex, to make sure that he would never look at her the same way again. It was a calculated move. Strip away Alex's trust in her, break him emotionally, and make him too weak to continue his investigation. And it worked. By the time Alex arrived at the club, his heart was heavy with the weight of what he saw. His wife, who had once been a symbol of his stable life, was now a pawn in a game far more dangerous than he had imagined. His investigation, which had once seemed so close to cracking, was now a distant thought. His focus was consumed by the emotional devastation of witnessing his wife's transformation, and his desire for justice was overshadowed by personal betrayal. As the chaos unfolded, the gangsters and their women became little more than background noise. Rebecca, in her drugged haze, was unable to fight back. The gang knew exactly what they were doing. Tim had succeeded in distracting Alex from the truth, that the real crime was happening under his nose, and now, it was too late to stop it. By the time Alex had recovered enough to act, it was already over. The damage was done. Rebecca was in too deep, and Alex was left with a choice. Continue with the investigation and risk losing everything, or turn his back on the case to save the woman who had already been lost to the very criminals he had been trying to take down. Tim had won. Alex was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. The day Alex filed for divorce, it felt like a personal defeat, but he knew it was the only way forward. His mind had been consumed with thoughts of Rebecca's betrayal, her addiction, and the slow unraveling of everything he had worked for. He had watched helplessly as she spiraled deeper into the grip of Tim White's drugs, her body and mind no longer her own. The woman he had loved and trusted, the woman he had built a life with, had become a stranger. He was no longer sure if he was fighting to save her, or if he was fighting for the family he had lost. Rebecca's reaction was predictable. She begged, she pleaded, But Alex's resolve had hardened over the weeks. He had seen the way she had humiliated herself, how she had betrayed their marriage for the allure of the very world he had been fighting to bring down. Her dependency on the drugs, on Tim's manipulation, had robbed her of everything: her dignity, her strength, her integrity. The woman who had once stood beside him had become a hollow shell, and Alex couldn't save her anymore. The divorce proceedings were swift, but emotionally draining. The papers were signed, and the finality of it hit Alex like a physical blow. It was hard to explain, even to himself, how he felt. There was anger, sadness, betrayal, but also a strange sense of relief. Relief that he was no longer caught in the vicious cycle, no longer tethered to someone who had made choices that had destroyed their life together. Rebecca was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. Alex left the house, the home they had built together, and moved into a small apartment in the city. It was a fresh start, or at least that was what he told himself. He buried himself in his work, the investigation he had been so determined to finish before everything fell apart. But his mind often drifted back to Rebecca, to the chaos that had consumed her, and to the unanswered question of what would happen to her now that he was no longer there. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.